It is hot. Anyway, I am the Justin back again, and today we're going to talk about something that is very near and dear to my heart: video games. But it would take me forever to go over the vast history of video games. So that's not what we're going to talk about. Today we're going to talk about one key aspect of video games, and those are graphics. And more importantly, are graphics making video games better? So what better way for us to look at this objectively and as a whole than for us to put on our metaphorical thinking caps, take a little ride in our DeLorean, and go back a ways and see how things used to look compared to how they look now.
What a lot of gamers may not know is that video games actually came into popularity during the 1950s, but they weren't as accessible as the later consoles became. In fact, a lot of them were played on vectors, which were large computers, and could be played on standard tube televisions. So let's kind of go a little bit forward to where most of us started playing video games, and that was the third generation, the dawn of the Nintendo Entertainment System.
You see, the main difference between Nintendo's system and all the systems prior in the previous two generations was the fact that it did away with the random joystick and actually invented the gamepad, which was not only more user-friendly, but more comfortable. But let's not forget the main reason why new systems and new generations move forward. It's actually the graphical quality.
Atari classics such as Space Invaders somewhat struggle with trying to emulate what actual objects look like, instead defaulting to a blackened background to really make the visuals pop in a way that looks somewhat familiar. But that's where the NES succeeded. Nintendo was actually able to give pixels and use sprites in ways that had never been seen before, making you believe that with their vibrant backgrounds and colorful characters, that you were actually in the world that you were playing.
It was literally a night and day comparison, going from the blackened visuals of what we had seen before to the vibrant colors of the NES. It truly gave you this feeling that you were actually a part of a story, and that turn gave us better games.
This visual shift bled into the ideas and concepts of the games themselves. Developers' limitations were pushed, and from these pixels came a stronger sense of narrative and awareness. In short, things just looked a lot cooler.
And then with the fourth generation came one of the greatest consoles ever to grace mankind.
Okay, so granted it was the Genesis that really took off for Sega. The system had a certain flair. You knew what was Sega even without seeing a name. The graphics were smoother, more vibrant, and with a 16-bit processor, it was the most advanced console to date.
Up until this point in gaming, most consoles just came out in a vacuum. I mean, there were a number that we can't even name. But when Nintendo came on the scene, they pretty much had their finger on the pulse of the gaming community and what they wanted. But then when the Sega and the Sega Genesis followed after it, for the first time ever, we had two companies going head to head and thus becoming brands and having their own unique identities. This was the start of the first console war.
By the time the Genesis had dropped, Nintendo had already made a name for themselves. And by the time the Genesis dropped, the Nintendo also dropped their next system, the Super NES. While they were both vying for people's homes as well as their pockets, the two companies did what any other mature entertainment medium would resort to: letting the gamers decide. But how? By way of graphical differences, taking the same games and giving them their own personal once-over.
So we as gamers once again saw a rise in the graphics, and actually the visual quality once again being the mainstay of the reason why you bought the game. Up to this rivalry point, we were kind of still sticking on just the very concepts alone. A plumber in a strange land, some guy killing an alien, or some guy eating something else. But this was a moment for both of these companies to show the gamers why they play video games in the first place and what separates two games. games from each other.
Processors were pushed to their limits while games looked better and better, but a lot of heart and soul were lost in these games. They were just shallow ports. While they became more appealing to look at, they became a bit of a pain to play. That was until one game actually integrated the visuals into the gameplay.
While it was apparent that these games were looking better, a lot of gamers were getting frustrated. And we just didn't want titles with no heart. So if these games were going to look better, they had better do something different. And one studio sought to do something completely different and invest you in the characters and the violence that was happening on screen by the visuals. That game was none other than Mortal Kombat. So that was just part one on our journey to see if visuals actually do make video games better. I am the Justin. Keep fighting.